joining us. This is now the third federal agent involved shooting in Minneapolis as a result of Operation Metro Surge. We had Renee Good January 7th. There was a man that ICE says they were trying to detain from Venezuela on January 14th, and then this one this morning. So if you could first I know there's a lot of videos circulating. It's hard to draw conclusions because we don't see what was happening 15 minutes before this or what was happening right in the middle of that huddle. But what are your impressions of this situation so far?
Yeah, initially I was kind of, I had a little bit of skepticism seeing the DHS's initial statement that they made, because they said that the person approached them with a firearm. They didn't say that the firearm was drawn or that, threatened officers or anything like that, just that he had a firearm. And now every video angle that we've seen seems to indicate that there was no visible firearm at that point. So it's uncertain why there would have been any perception of a threat there. And then, it's very difficult to see what happens in that huddle. But one of the most recent clips that I've seen seems to indicate that prior to the shots being fired, one of the agents who didn't have a firearm in his hand reaches into the huddle, pulls out a firearm, and it matches the photo that DHS put out this morning perfectly. So my take of it is it looks like he was actually disarmed prior to the fatal shots being fired.
Well, and as you said, there's a lot of angles, and it's hard to tell in that, like at what point did they see the weapon? Is, from what you can tell, any sign that the man on the ground was reaching for his weapon when it was pulled away? Anything like that? Hard to see in there, I know.
Yeah, the newest video angle that I've seen, it looks like it's got the facing towards the man. Yeah, it's this video right here, and you see his arms are kind of pinned right in front of him as he's on the ground, and then then you see the agent in the gray coat there, who doesn't have a firearm in his hand, reach around and pull out a firearm. So right here, you see it looks like the man's. I think Mr. Pretty's arms are pinned down in front of him. So he's not reaching for his hot firearm. Both hands are right there. It's difficult to see what happens right in this second here, but we do see that the agent comes back with the firearm in his hand. That firearm matches the firearm that was photographed by DHS, saying that it was Mr. Pretty's firearm, and then that's when you hear the shots fired.
Do you know, it's been often said that there really only has to be the fear. A police officer or an agent needs to fear for his life or the lives of his coworkers, the people with him. But what is the threshold? I don't know if you know that answer. What is the threshold, or where that's reasonable?
So it's reasonable fear of imminent death or great bodily harm. So they have to have a reasonable, based off of the circumstances, what would another person in that situation perceive it? You can't have an unreasonable fear, but it has to be reasonable for the circumstances. And, barring any more information, it seems like there's at least, it's questionable whether or not a person who has been disarmed was capable of producing that deadly fear for police officers.
Right. We're speaking with Rob Dorr, the president of the Minnesota Gun Owners Law Center. We just want to make sure that we're reminding people who you are, what you represent, and that you're also a staunch supporter of the Second Amendment. So what are you thinking in terms of what the public needs to understand? Because I think there is an inclination to jump to conclusions. This is a very volatile time that we're living in, and videos are being shared the moment after something happens. And so what would you say in terms of investigating a situation like this? What does the public need to remember as all of this information is coming in so quickly?
Yeah, I think in the first 24 hours, the information we get isn't always the most accurate. I think initial reports was this man was a 51-year-old man. So things develop quickly, and so I think it's always good for people to absorb information, but keep it with a certain amount of skepticism. But then also, there are some things that are just objectively true that we can look at. Like for example, if he has a permit to carry, it's not unlawful to be carrying while you're exercising your First Amendment. You don't have to pick between which rights you exercise. It's not a crime to be near police officers. It's not a crime to be in a protest with a firearm. The crime comes when you actually, take that firearm and cause somebody to be in fear of death or great bodily harm, or otherwise threaten them. That's the crime. So I think there are things that are objectively true, but then also things that are open to interpretation, and those tend to develop, especially as time moves on after the first 24 hours.
And Rob, one of the questions I see, Keith, that keeps coming up, you just mentioned that it's not illegal for somebody to be armed to be near police officers, but is there a reasonable distance that protesters should be keeping from armed federal agents or any police officers in terms of a protest or somebody who is anti the reason they're there? What is that reasonable distance?
There's not like a hard set number. Generally, wherever you're lawfully allowed to be, you're free to protest there. So that's generally, sidewalks, public squares, things like that. You're not allowed to block roadways during protesting. That is something that does happen commonly. So, you have to be mindful of that. And then ultimately, the courts have held that the government does have the authority to declare an assembly unlawful, and you are required to disperse at that point.
Rob, what are your thoughts in terms of investigating matters like this? All three of these agent-involved shootings. Do you want to see state officials be part of that investigation as well?
Absolutely. I think that's really the only way that we could have any sort of reasonable comfort that there's transparency going on. I'm always hesitant when the government says that they're investigating themselves, because more often than not, they find that they did nothing wrong. So it's always better to have an extra set of eyes, to have somebody who's detached from the command structure, that doesn't have a vested interest in the particular person. When there's officer-involved shootings in Minnesota, it's not the agency that the officer worked for that does the investigation. It's the BCA, and prior to that, it used to be an outside agency that would conduct that investigation, because we value that transparency and that outside look to make sure that the officers' actions were objectively reasonable.
Okay.
Yeah, one more question, Rob, before we let you go, and we may ask for a little bit of time later today, too, as more information comes in on this. But when you heard about this shooting this morning, what was the first thing that went through your mind?
So when I first heard about it, my first exposure to it was the DHS tweet that went out, when I opened up Twitter in the morning. And I was immediately skeptical. The DHS has certainly had a particular bias in their communications, so I have a natural skepticism towards it. But the words that they used caused me to have really great pause when they say that the man approached them with a firearm. My first reaction was, okay, how did you know? Did he have it exposed? Those key pieces of information were missing. And then they go on to really paint this narrative that he was prepared to massacre police officers. And as we saw in the videos that come out, each video that comes out seems to challenge that narrative, which really just makes me it gives me, it makes me sad that we don't really have a reliable narrator, and all of us are kind of left trying to piece it together from, what we can see objectively with our own eyes.
I agree there. Yeah, we're all kind of just watching every single piece of video in slow motion and drawing conclusions, and we still do need to gather all the information, but certainly a lot of people have a lot of questions about what went down there.
We just need to and these things take time. We need to get all the pieces of information, what was being said in those moments too. But Rob Doar, the president of the Minnesota Gun Owners Law Center, thank you so much for joining us and just walking us through use of force issues and interpretations in situations like this.
Thank you for your time.